Good morning and welcome to Ask the Expert. I'm Joe Taylor. This morning, another in the ongoing series of programs presented by the Northwest Regional Key Program for Quality Early Learning. The program, through the Northwest Institute of Research, oversees a grant from the Office of Child Development and Early Learning at the Pennsylvania Department of Human Services and the Department of Education. The goal of the program is to improve the outcomes for young children as they prepare for school. John Poza from the Pennsylvania Key is the host of the program and is with us throughout the series. John, we have a guest this morning all the way from the middle of the country, right?
That's correct, Joe. Good morning. We have Rob Grunewald, who is an economist for the Federal Reserve Bank of Minneapolis, Minnesota. Rob conducts research on economic and community development issues. He co-authored Early Childhood Development, Economic Development with a High Public Return, and several subsequent articles on the economic impact of investing in early childhood education. He speaks to community and business leaders, policymakers, and media throughout the country. Rob also serves on the board of directors for Think Small, Leaders in Early Learning, and the advisory board for First Children's Finance Growth Fund. Welcome to the program, Rob.
Thank you.
Rob, I was telling Rob before we went on air that I see Rob talking about investment in early childhood in a lot of our training videos and visuals and that we use in our work. And so he's well known and respected across the country in terms of his research. Rob, early childhood education is receiving more and more attention at the federal and state levels. And in fact, in December, President Obama signed the Every Student Succeeds Act, which in essence replaces No Child Left Behind, and it includes $250 million in preschool development grants to help states in low-income areas for getting prepared for kindergarten. Talk to us a little bit about your work in general in terms of your research into the importance of the economic impact of early childhood education.
Certainly. Well, as an economist at the Federal Reserve Bank, I'm interested in how economies grow. We have, of course, a lot of economists throughout our Federal Reserve System investigating what are those key ingredients of economic growth. And certainly the productivity of the workforce and the talent of the workforce really drives a lot of that economic growth. And in terms of developing those skills for the workforce, the story really begins very early. And so over 10 years ago, our director of research, Art Rolnick here, and myself began looking at research on early childhood development. We became convinced that if children are off to a good start by the time they get to kindergarten, they're going to be on a trajectory toward success and being a productive member of the workforce. But we also see that if children are behind by kindergarten, it's a struggle to catch up, and most of them do not. So generally speaking, what we're able to do is look at that child development research, and fortunately we do have some long-term studies that have been able to look at the impact of providing high-quality early childhood learning programs for children, particularly from disadvantaged environments, and it shows that they can have a strong impact not only through their schooling, but also evidence that it lasts into their adulthood.
Yeah, and one of the important things that people, families need to realize is that even in low-income, very difficult early childhood situations, family situations, those children, despite all the other factors that they have to deal with in growing up, just in growing up in general, that if they have access to quality early childhood education, they can overcome a lot of those other factors that come with growing up in a disadvantaged environment and be on the same level playing field as other children, correct?
It's certainly early learning is an important part of the solution. Of course, there's a lot of factors at play, but what the evidence shows is that if kids and families get some support early, that just gives them a lot better shot. And the implications are that when children are able to come prepared for school, they succeed in school, they ultimately get more education than if they would have arrived not ready. and they earn more money in the workforce. And so economists have been able to tabulate all of these economic benefits in monetary values, and they've been able to show that the cost-benefit ratio for one of these studies is as high as $16 returned for every dollar invested.
So often in today's political environment, it's programs like early childhood learning and development that get cut from budgets or periodically reduced. Obviously, you have the research, you're quoting it, but how do you make this case, or how can someone make this case at the level of the school board, the district, the state?
Yes, certainly as an economist at the Federal Reserve, I'm a researcher. I'm providing information, so I'm not on the ground as an advocate per se, but certainly the information that we found is very compelling to policymakers when they read it and take it in, or hear from us at a lecture, or even at a legislative hearing. What I do notice that advocates are able to take the economic case, let's say, and present some of this information to business leaders. And I get a chance to speak with business leaders in our own region up here in the Midwest, but also other places in the country. And what business leaders recognize is that the labor force, for many of these companies, they're going to, in the long run, they need it here domestically, the talent from our workers, and that they recognize that over the long run, there's going to be some challenges to find those highly skilled workers. And one of the solutions is to make sure that the kids are prepared and ready for school. So one way that advocacy has been able to help this move forward is that business leaders have taken up this message, and when they go to their legislatures or to Congress even, they will talk about the importance of investing in early learning. That's true in Pennsylvania, noticing that the business community there in Pennsylvania has been an important voice for supporting early learning investments in your state.
Well, one of the things I know from your research and just the state in general, Rob, Minnesota was kind of, in terms of the economic impact in your research, kind of was a forerunner in being able to prove the economic impact and the value, and kind of became somewhat of a model in terms of that throughout the rest of the country. Isn't that correct from your studies?
We were certainly able to highlight the results of these long-term studies. And there's 4 long-term studies that have fortunately been able to track children well into adulthood, and have been able to substantiate these benefits that really accrue throughout the whole life cycle. So back in 2003, we were able to look at those studies and be able to shine a light on the internal rate of return. The one calculation we did with these is to ask, what is that annual rate of return to some of these high-quality programs for children from disadvantaged environments? So you can think of your interest rate that you're receiving on your bank account, which these days is relatively low. But what we were able to do is show that on an annual basis over the lifetime of these benefits, they range from 7% annually up to 20% annually. And in business, when business leaders look at different investments and projects to invest in, those are the types of numbers that they're looking for to invest in. And, a rate of return of 15% or higher likely does not sit on the table long. A business person is going to pick it up and invest in that. So back when we wrote that paper, we were able to show business people and policymakers that there's a really strong rate of return. And that secondly, the majority of the return accrues to the public. Certainly the children and their families are benefiting from being in these programs, but if you line up all of the costs that are saved, 60 to 65% of the benefits are accruing to the non-participants or to the taxpayer.
Right. And the thing about that is we have advocacy here, not only in Pennsylvania, but throughout the country, for, looking to increase funding on the political level, at least in terms of our legislature and funding on the statewide level for early childhood, both in preschool and within our school districts. But how do we convince business people to put forward their own investment, not only for the benefit of the whole, but even for the benefit of their own individual companies? Because I think, based on your economics and, the research, we know the benefit, but sometimes it involves those companies looking a little further down the road in terms of how it's going to benefit themselves. Isn't that correct?
It does. It's a longer time horizon. Certainly a shorter time horizon are for the parent employees that are working at businesses. So businesses will note that if their parent employees have high quality child care and they're confident in those child care arrangements, they're likely going to be more productive while at work because they're not worrying about those child care arrangements. So certainly investments in a quality child care system are important for the current situation because that certainly helps parent employees. But in terms of accruing the long return on investment and these high returns, it's looking 10, 15, 20 years down the road. And what business people are often concerned about that quarter and what's happening now, but many business people do have that long view where they're understanding that for their own business and for their community, they need to be thinking into the future. And whenever you go to a Chamber of Commerce meeting or you talk to folks who are pulling business groups together, they're often concerned about the quality of the education system in terms of those graduates that are coming from our public schools. And many have recognized that if we help kids prepare for school, they're just going to have a much higher success rate to get through that schooling successfully and be productive.
Going back to the community and state level, it seems that wealthier communities and states with more highly educated populations get it. They fund programs that provide early childhood development, actually in a sense where it's least needed, while poorer, less educated communities and states may not provide the necessary level of funding needed. This is, if you will, upside down. How do we overcome that?
So I'm actually going to qualify that statement a bit because in terms of early investment, it's really a mixture throughout the country. And in fact, some of southern states that you wouldn't expect would have as strong of an investment in early childhood actually have made some strong investments.
Well, that's good to hear. I stand corrected.
Yeah.
So, for example, and I'm not speaking for every state, but Oklahoma has made strong investments in early learning. Arkansas has a notably high-quality early learning program. Alabama has come around too. So, and Georgia also has made notable investments in early learning. So these are examples of states, that certainly fall in that red category that have made strong investments and have had leadership from Republican governors that have been able to help those investments move forward. So throughout the country, there really is a mixed bag. What we do recognize, and what your statement certainly is true, is that at the local level and the family level too, those communities and those families that have more resources are more likely to have their children in a higher quality program. In wealthier communities, the child care offerings tend to be of higher quality, and that also the families in those communities can afford them. Also, many times those school districts have resources to make sure that kids are arriving at that kindergarten door prepared for school. So there is some truth to your statement. But overall, throughout the whole country, it's really a state-by-state experiment. And the different types of investments to be made, such as providing preschool for a year or two before kindergarten, having high-quality child care from as early as infancy through the early elementary years, also home visiting programs that reach out to families that are considered at risk, that are low income and could use some support very early on in that child's life. All of these investments are being made by states at some level, and some are certainly further along than others. But throughout the country, there's really a mixture that's out there.
Rob, I know from the economic standpoint, we always like to look, whether it's in early childhood or any other field, these public-private partnerships where we get industry to basically partner with government in investment. Obviously, being in Minneapolis, which is the headquarters for Target Corporation, General Mills, I think, is still based in Minneapolis. What are some success stories, some things where some of the companies that maybe you're familiar with have kind of been thinking outside the box and created some great and wonderful investments that have helped children?
In Minnesota, after the Federal Reserve Bank of Minneapolis released the research on the high return on early childhood, there was interest among business leaders here to get involved. And they were also very concerned about the Minnesota's kindergarten readiness assessment, which only showed that about half of children in Minnesota were arriving at kindergarten fully prepared to succeed in school. Of course, that's particularly concerning for Minnesotans because we have this show called A Prairie Home Companion by Garrison Keillor. He reminds everyone in Lake Wobegon that all the children are above average. So that the business leaders came together and they wanted to first get informed about the science of child development, hear more from Art Rolnick and myself about the economic return. And ultimately, they decided to form what was called the Minnesota Early Learning Foundation, which is a nonprofit, which included board members from Cargill and General Mills and Ecolab, some of these larger companies that are headquartered here in the Twin Cities. Also, the president of the University of Minnesota is on that board. And they raised from their corporate foundations about $20 million. And what they wanted to do is to make some key investments in some early learning programs and some system work to be able to show the legislature and the governor what would really benefit and work well here in Minnesota. And two of their key projects were a quality rating system for child care programs and all preschool programs here in the state. You have one.
The Keystone Stars.
That's
yes.
Keystone Stars.
Right.
Ours here in Minnesota is Parent Aware. And what the business leaders have done with Parent Aware is that they've been able to help market the tool to parents so that they can go online and find out the quality of child care programs in their area. And they've really stayed at the table and helped with that marketing. They've also done some research to make sure that the metrics that are being used in that Parent Aware system are working well. And the second area that they invested is in a scholarship program to provide scholarships to low-income families that have children at ages 3 or 4 to send their child to a high-quality program. And based on that model, on the scholarship model, the state has been able to move that system forward as well and is now funding that at about $50 million a year to reach more children who are at this age with high-quality early learning. Minnesota still has a ways to go to reach all those eligible children and to make sure that they have a high-quality program. But the business leaders that formed that Minnesota Early Learning Foundation really helped gain some momentum in our state and to highlight some of the research on these pilot projects and give some confidence to the legislature and the governor here to move some of these investments forward.
Well, I'd be remiss if I didn't bring up some concerns, and this was actually addressed in your research about sustainability of early investments. While some long-term studies have demonstrated that a range of benefits from early learning programs continues into adulthood, results from 2 recent studies showed that positive results dropped off within a few years. Now, in light of the recent findings and with new investments emerging with the potential for even more, since there are still waiting lists for eligible children and families, policymakers are concerned about sustaining the benefits from early learning programs into children's school-age years and beyond. Now, tell me a little bit about, in your research, about the so-called catch-up, or as opposed to the fade-out, in terms of the benefits of quality early childhood education.
Yeah, so we have this combination of research. We have these well-controlled long-term studies that have established that if children have high-quality early learning, that the benefits show up through their schooling and then well into adulthood. There has been a randomized controlled trial of Head Start about 10 years ago that the results came out just a few years ago. And in that study, they showed that certainly children who attended Head Start benefited, but they saw by the third grade, the children who attended Head Start looked very similar to the children who were in the control group, who were in the comparison. Also, recently there's been a result from Tennessee, and their early learning program showed that benefits accrued early, but they weren't seeing them at a place about third grade later, where they're trying to assess whether the benefits were sustained. And certainly you need to dig a little deeper into these studies to understand the context of Head Start children who are in the control group. Many of those kids, not all, certainly the children who had attended Head Start were more likely to be in a high-quality program. If they were enrolled, they were more likely to attend. But some of the control group children certainly were in other early learning programs, too. In Tennessee, there's some concern about some of the attrition that happened and being able to get enough of the original cohort fully in that evaluation later on. So there's some concerns there. But aside from those, we do want to be cautious about making sure that we're sustaining those early gains. And a great way to start that is to make sure that your early learning programs are of high quality, that they have well-trained teachers, and that they're using curriculum that is helping children prepare for school. And if they get off to a good start, that's going to really help them. There's also transition points. The transition point from preschool to kindergarten, to make sure that there's some alignment between what's happening in the early learning program relative to that school environment that children are going to. And that really the discussion around early learning has largely become early preschool through grade 3, so that we're making sure that children are reading by grade 3. So we want to follow up with high-quality schooling in those early elementary years. And there's been some models. One is the Child Parent Center model, which has now been expanded outside of Chicago to other locations in Wisconsin and Minnesota. And some of the research on that model has been able to show these elements. If you're able to have well-trained teachers, you're able to make sure that you have strong leadership across the preschool program and in your early elementary years, that you can sustain those gains. And then another key component of it is that you're making sure that parents are involved, that parents are part of understanding what's happening in that early learning program, that they are engaged with what their child's education is about at the program, but also being able to support that learning back at home, and then continuing that involvement into the elementary years. So there's some strategies around how to make sure that these gains are sustained. And so there's discussion and research, certainly in the early learning field, to sustain these gains once we have them.
Well, there's no question the transition path between early learning and kindergarten and the tools families and communities have to support early development is key. And I guess the real question is applying the so-called levers is very multidisciplinary, and it involves a multi-location effort. I'll tell you, there was a fascinating interview, Rob. I appreciate you being on the program. Our time has run out, but thanks so much for shedding some light on the economics of early childhood investment, and I hope to have you back again.
Sounds great, and best wishes to your work in Pennsylvania.
Thank you.
And that's our program for today. We'll be back in 2 weeks at this same time. In the meantime, you can go online to learn more at papromiseforchildren.com. For John Posa and the Northwest Regional Key Program for Quality Early Learning, I'm Joe Taylor. Thank you for listening, and have a great day.